Better than you think you do. So I love working with Denise, and I do have to comment that because of Todd Fortune's illnesses and his departure from the county commission, and the fact that the county commissioners, there are only 3 and then there are 2, when Todd wasn't able to be there just now until the vacancy is filled. So that means that to do anything at all, both of the county commissioners have to be present, and both of them have to be on the same page with stuff. So I think Denise deserves a lot of credit for the leadership that she's shown, and soon we'll be back up to speed with 3 people, and we look forward to continue to work with you. I suppose there's some overlap, but Bill mentioned the budget, and we now, like the county, are on a fiscal year basis ending June 30. And so the first budget meeting of the year was Monday, and it seemed like we just put the budget for the current fiscal year to bed, and already we're talking about when we're going to have presentations and when we're going to have the budget presented to us and have that process. And of course, the Christmas present from the staff is that we're required to decide what the property tax rate will be for the operating levy for the next fiscal year, and we have to decide that and deliver our decision to the county auditor by the 15th. And if we don't do that, we have no property tax revenues in that year. So it's important that we act. And when the city charter was approved by the voters in the 20s, I read, there was provided a 6.1 operating millage. A few years ago, maybe 15, the powers that be decided, well, why don't we roll back the revenues from the 6.1 each year with the decision that's presented annually, and so the property taxes will never go up. Never mind that expenses go up, never mind that property values go up and all the rest. And I recall in my previous time in council, somebody whispered something about doing that, and Charlie Tabb said, do not touch the 6.1 operating millage. And of course, we sometime later failed to follow his advice, so we have this debate each year, and the difference between keeping the property tax revenue total at approximately $29 million and therefore rolling back the millage to 5 something on the one hand, or going with 6.1 is $5 million in revenue to our operating budget, which is a big deal. We right now are projecting a budget deficit for the fiscal year that begins July 1, and I keep confused. That's the 2021 fiscal year is with at 6.17 million, and at the fixed revenue amount, it is not 7 million but 12 million. So we've already bought ourselves an extra $5 million in a problem. Now, the reality is that, and you mentioned tax abatement, a lot of folks are feeling a lot of angst about the city's tax abatement policies, and we can discuss that. And so there's a lot of sensitivity about property taxes, and that explains the council's support for not what the administration recommended, but the rollback one more time. We continue to be hopeful that the tax abatement agreement that we had with the school board can be continued. It just expired at the end of December. And for the last 20 years, the basic deal has been, in exchange for giving the city the exclusive authority to grant tax abatements to developments of various kinds, we promised to give the school board, in lieu of taxes, payments of 25% of the taxes that would otherwise be payable for what's called CRA tax abatements, and for TIF tax abatements, 27%. And plus, for this, as an outgrowth of the stadium deal, which was made when neither of us were.
Say it again.
We weren't here. Well, I was on my sabbatical.
I was in diapers.
Okay. So in any event, a promise was made to give the school board $5 million a year. And we've had an interesting series of conversations or lack of conversations between the council and the school board. We're trying to schedule yet another presentation, another meeting, hopefully next week, that would include the school board's explanation, but from their expert, Gene Wagner, who's the treasurer of the school board, to explain what they think the consequences are of the granting of tax abatements. And without getting too much in the weeds, the question is, if a tax abatement is granted, what is the impact on the allocation of funds to the school board from the state of the fact that there's abated property? And generally, one of the factors is the tax valuation of the property in the district. And the more the district is worth, it has the consequence that less is allocated to the district. Now, how is abated property treated? Because it's abated for tax purposes, and don't forget that 25% that's paid, because it's abated for tax purposes, the appreciated growth in that property that's abated is not reported. I mean, this is above board. It's not part of the report of the valuation for the property in the district that goes to the state, nor that reduces the allocation of the state funding formula. And counterintuitive as it seems, the consequence is that as to abated property in many years, it has meant that the school board has received more money from the state allocation than they would have. Now, the school board, as we've tried to discuss this, has said, well, we don't agree that that's something we should take into account. We say, look, and to a person on city council, we are saying, we want to hold you harmless, but we don't feel that we're obligated to give you more than the cost to you of tax abatement. So that's kind of the discussion that's underway. There's some alternatives that are being discussed, and I think there's a good chance there will be some resolution soon. I could talk too long. I have a list of 11 topics that I don't like, but you did mention I think you mentioned the levy that this community has to decide about the transportation system in March. We're asking taxpayers to agree to an increase in sales tax of 0.8%, and that money would be dedicated to two things. One would be metro, and the other would be infrastructure improvements in the city and out of the city along metro lines. And the commitment would be that metro would be improved, that metro would serve outlying areas better, and the infrastructure money would be used for community priorities like the Western Hills Viaduct and whatever your list may be. We collectively who live in the city at the last election approved an amendment to the charter that says if this sales tax increase is approved, our earnings tax will be decreased from 2.1% to 1.8%. So that's hopefully the carrot for those who either work in the city and or live in the city, because the taxes are going to go down, and for some there'll be a wash, maybe for some they come out ahead. And then parenthetically, the city will have to face the question going forward, or can we meet our need with just a 1.8% earnings tax? The fact is that if you look at other cities in Ohio, we don't compare very well from the standpoint of revenues I think are needed to operate a city in a way that we want to in the 21st century. Cleveland, and these percentages don't include anything for transit, whereas our 2.1% has included that 0.3 portion for transportation, which would be taken out. Cleveland's at 2%, Columbus 2.5%, Dayton at 2.25%, Toledo at 2.25%. And I think it's fair to reach the conclusion that we do need the additional revenues that might be possible. There won't be an earnings tax increase unless the voters approve, unless it's sold, unless the business community is persuaded to support it, and all the rest. Now, it's important for those that call the streetcar that trolley line, which I don't, to understand that the city has now taken over operation of the streetcar system. SORTA has absolutely nothing to do with it. Metro has absolutely nothing to do with it. Not a single dime of the sales tax levy will impact the streetcar one way or the other. The streetcar is about to be dramatically changed before summer by making ridership free. And we have the reality that unlike Kansas City, which has a streetcar line about as long as ours, operates the same vehicles that we operate, and has had from the beginning no free ridership and therefore a phenomenal patronage and phenomenal support. And my understanding is, it wasn't in Kansas City, but unlike Cincinnati, Kansas City avoided a political fight at the beginning of the decision to construct the streetcar, and it's been embraced as something good. And whereas in Cincinnati, we have been through how many votes about it, how many mayor elections and council member elections have included discussion of the streetcar decision. And you just wonder, and I'm sure, given who's talking about running for mayor, we are must endure this one more time. And if you talk to folks that understand what is driving improvements downtown and driving improvements in OTR, a big factor is the streetcar. It's a symbol that says, hey, we are an urban community, we are going to grow, and we're going to invite people, young and old, to live in the central business district in OTR, and we're going to do so in a different way than we're going to harken back to our distant past when 50,000 people lived in, I'm going to stop, 50,000 people lived in OTR.
No, I was